today to talk to us about BDD. So, to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Feel free to interrupt me throughout this. Do tell me to speak slower, because I'm a really sad individual and I get quite passionate about BDD. So I will freely admit that, so please tell me to slow down or ask questions. So, who's here is a dev? Hands up, dev? Okay. Tester? Okay, so we're test dominated here, but still this is applicable to both roles. So I'm Alan. I work for a company called Hindsight. This is a company I co-founded just about 2.5 years ago. We help companies with BDD. So this is my passion. Now, my background was, I've been in IT about 15 years now. I've spent probably close to 10 years of that as a dev. In the last 5 years, I've spent doing test-related activities, but also I've moved into requirements and BDD. So I've done a bit of different roles, and at Hindsight we produce tools. We've got a tool for Jira that allows you to do BDD in Jira. So I'm actually a product owner for that. So I've got experience in all the different roles. I've helped a number of different companies with BDD. So some of our customers are Intel, JP Chase, US Treasury, Bank of England. So we deal with some quite large customers with their adoption of BDD. So enough about me, because I'll go into my life story, and that's not what you're here for. I've made the assumption with this talk, everybody knows what BDD is. Anybody want a quick explanation before I go into this? Who's not comfortable with what BDD is? Don't be scared, because I've got 2 games with people.
I would say just give a brief explanation, because a lot of people who I can see here don't actually know what BDD is.
Okay.
Whether they admit or not, they don't.
Okay, so who here has used Cucumber, SpecFlow, or another tool to be able to test automation? Okay, that's the majority of you. So is BDD using Cucumber to write automated tests? Is BDD using given, when, then? The answer is that's a complete and utter myth. This is the whole basis of my talk. Nothing to do with automation. Forget automation. You can do BDD without automation. So I'm just going to move this over here because I can't read it even with my glasses. So this is how I explain BDD to people. Business analysis technique that uses the power of examples to discover and communicate requirements. It just happens we've got some cool tools that can actually turn these requirements into executable specifications and check that we've implemented them. It's about discovering and communicating. It's also worth noting that BDD is also known by specification by example. Sometimes gets confused with ATDD, acceptance test driven development. Now, normally I'd say there's no difference. There's a minute difference between the two. Acceptance test driven development, we probably end up writing lots of tests for edge cases, like checking that every single form input has been validated. That technically isn't BDD. So why do we need a better way of discovering and communicating requirements? Well, we've got 2 types of defects found by testers. You have the implementation defects, the program crashing, not adding up to the right result. These are really simple to fix. And then you've got the requirements defects, where the actual requirements have been misunderstood by developers and the testers, and/or the testers, because it happened to both parties. Business didn't know what they wanted, so told you to build the wrong thing. And other reasons. Terminology can be confusing. Each role has a different terminology. It can be confusing between the two. The interesting thing is, though, 50 to 60% of these defects found by testers are requirements-related issues. So the developer's getting frustrated when the testers come along and report a bug. It might not be your fault unless it's an implementation defect. It's actually the communication issue of requirements. The developer couldn't help it. If they're told to build the wrong thing, they're going to build the wrong thing. It's also worth noting these defects from requirements are 100 to 200 times more expensive to fix than a simple implementation defect. You're being paid, developers are being paid to work on faulty requirements. So BDD is all about shifting some testing left and actually testing the requirements. So I'll keep iterating over this, discovering new pain points. It's also worth noting the word examples. You've got acceptance criteria in your user stories. Examples of concrete situations of that acceptance criteria in use. You're naming people, you're naming values. Acceptance criteria can be quite willing. So it's also important about examples. Now, Elise Keogh did a tweet, it must be over a year ago now, and it goes along the lines of having a conversation between the business and the technical roles is more important than capturing the conversation, which is more important than automating the conversation. I kind of use this as a BDD maturity model. So many companies have adopted the BDD tools and gone at it from test automation and trying to get to the requirements aspect later on, actually has an impact and influence on how they do BDD. And this is where I, myself coming into a company as a coach on BDD, I see a lot of problems. So I'm going to be focusing on my talk about having the conversations and capturing the conversations. I can't cover that whole subject in the amount of time I had this afternoon, but please do ask questions at the end. There's lots of useful things there. I can even discuss automation, because I've done that at a lot of conferences in the past, but I'm really interested in the conversations and capturing. So, anybody here musical? Do we have any people who musical? Anybody play an instrument here? Okay. Well volunteered. You volunteered?
I did not realise I was getting into this.
Okay. Well, I saw everybody was quite shy, so I actually. Okay, so I want you to tap out a tune for us. So just tap it out. Okay, and the tune I want you to tap out is that tune. Now, before you do that, by the way, everybody's going to have to guess what tune the tune is. What percentage of people do you think will get it right? Bear in mind, it's a really well-known tune.
57.
57%, very precise, I like that. Do you want to attempt tapping this out?
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody got any guesses?
Happy birthday.
Okay. So Elizabeth Newton did an experiment about people tapping out well-known songs. Why the person tapping out the song believed that 50% of people get it right, so you're really close on that one. Only 2.5%, or about 3%, depending on the variations of the experiment, because it's been repeated, actually get it right. And this is to do with a cognitive bias called the illusion of transparency. You believe other people you're talking to have the same mental state, the same understanding as you. This is why we need to have the conversations in BDD. Because the product owner communicating the concepts to you will have this bias. How many times has the product owner gone and said, oh, try to explain it, and then you start asking questions and go, oh, you know what I mean, go off and do it. They've got that bias. That's why we need to have the conversation. That's why we need to use examples in BDD to tease out all the information.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Sit down. Yeah, no more music, don't worry. Okay, so this can also be seen as from the developer's point of view. How many times have you gone in to read another developer's code and you've gone, what, WTF? You know, what's going on here? Even if it's actually good code, you have a different mental state when viewing it to the person who's written it. So even with good code, you're going to be saying a few curses or asking questions about it compared to certain bad code. But it's this illusion of transparency and cognitive bias that's causing this. So this is why we need the 3 Amigos meeting. 3 Amigos, product owner, developer, and tester. Each person brings a different perspective to the conversation. So you've got the developers who are going to be building it. They're going to have a certain set of biases. Testers are going to have a different set of biases. We've also got different attributes coming towards it. So you've got the lateral and critical thinking skills coming towards it, starting to tease out different information that the developers will tease out. So you can think of it as testing requirements. If we're picking up a lot of issues when the software's finished during the testing stage with the requirements, why not actually put some effort into getting them right in the first place? So this is what about the whole conversation of having 3 different roles in the 3 Amigos meetings was about. Now, that's why we need to have the conversation. The other aspect we'll be talking about is capturing the conversation. So we're going to be playing another little game. We're going to be playing Chinese whispers. So if we think of the bad old days of waterfall, got a huge, great big requirements document written. The business are meant to put all their ideas for the next 2 years down into one document. It's never going to stay relevant. But what happens is people have a conversation about requirements. Once the project started, they have a discussion. The results of that discussion never get put back into the requirements. It's all verbal discussions. Now going back to Liz's tweet about having a conversation is more important than capturing the conversation, I'd actually argue capturing the conversation is so important as well. It should be on the same level. It should be on the same level as actually having a conversation. The reason is in Chinese whispers, or for Americans, it's a telephone game. Everybody played this as a child.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, we're gonna just do one side of the room because this will just take way too long. But I'm gonna pick on you, my volunteer. Go volunteer, thank you. You've got to remember this. Just pass it on to the person next to you. Whispering.
Just this one.
This is a really, really simple requirement. Really important project, but it's really simple. Lots of trouble if you get this wrong. Whoa. Yeah.
Okay, so whisper.
Yep. We'll just go to the end of the row, and then the person at the end of the row will have to stand up and tell us. By the way, if anybody's dealing with skeptical product owners or other team members, play these games to actually show them that these biases and these problems actually exist. We found them really useful. This is where I get right. Pass it on to one more person and then I've had my break.
Husband tells wife to go to the shop. If there's bread, buy it. If not, buy it anyway.
Okay. I feel we're going to have a very, very useful wife here. So, a woman asks her husband, a programmer, to go shopping. She tells him, please go to the nearby grocery store to buy some bread. Also, they have eggs by 6. Okay, so one thing I've just demonstrated is verbal communication requirements, as it's spread around a team, it can distort. That's just 2 lines, 2 sentences, and those got distorted. But also, the requirement was wrong in the first place. What should a husband return with?
6 loaves of bread.
Correct. The English language can actually be quite bad for explaining the requirements. This is why we use examples in BDD. The wife could give her husband an example. She could have told him, give an example of buying bread if there's no eggs, and buying bread if there are 6 eggs. And communicate the requirement that way. It's just English or natural language can be imperfect, but we still use it at BDD. So we have 3 Amigos meetings, and you get some quite big blob of text. Who here actually tries to write their given when thens with the product owner in the Amigo meeting? Do you all take away notes and go and write them up afterwards? When do your given when thens get written? Which is before you came? Before code's written?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, so you're doing it just in time. Yeah, that's not a bad way of doing it. So when you have the meetings, because it's really, we find that some teams actually try and write their given when thens with the product owner. Nobody speaks with given when thens. It's really difficult to do. It's really difficult to notate in that format or create examples in that format in the meeting. Product owners quite often feel their time is wasted. So one handy tip I have is either take notes, roughly what the scenarios are, or just use a simple dictaphone. I use £20, I just use one of these, plug it in, got an MP3, and I can sit there and type them up, and can take them back to the product owner for a second check. So we can do simple things. But let's just look at this example for a hotel system. So for all our training purposes, we have a hotel check-in system that we use, but actually some of these come from real user stories and real conversations. So the product owner is trying to explain an example to us. So, well, Roy, our receptionist, will take the details of the guests checking in. For guests staying 2 nights in the standard room, he'll look up their loyalty membership level. If they're a gold member and we have superior rooms available for the 2 nights, we'll upgrade them for free. Okay? It's a nice example. We've got Roy, our receptionist. We've got a real human being. We know there's something about guests. We've got 2 night stays. We've got an example of 2. We've got standard room compared to superior rooms. Nice example. We've got gold membership level. Lots of information for us to start asking questions. What other membership levels are there? Should they get this bonus? Is there a platinum level or a silver level? Should they get this? But actually taking this and writing it into this scenario, we can lose a lot of information and turning it to a given when then. A lot of information can be useful. So we've got our scenario, gold member checks in and the room's available. Given a guest with standard room reservation, and the guest is a gold loyalty member, and the superior room is not reserved, when the receptionist checks in the guest, then the guest should be upgraded to a superior room. What kind of information have we dropped from this example?
Duration.
Duration.
2 nights.
Yeah. What else have we dropped?
Roy.
Yeah, that's the who. I just gave that away. This is actually starting to turn into acceptance criteria rather than a concrete example, just by dropping details. It might be really easy to automate this, and actually come up with a cucumber test for it, but actually as an example to communicate requirements, we're starting to drop information that could be useful to us. So I've highlighted the key bits of information. Now the one I didn't pick up on is available. Go back. I said not reserved. But here, Roy is, in our example, our product owner has used available. There could actually be a difference in meaning to the business of what that is. We might have rooms that aren't available because they're being cleaned, or they've been booked. So the actual definition and terminology, we should actually try and keep the same. So I've been reading up a lot. Okay, by the way, I'm severely dyslexic. I hate English as a subject at school. I hated it, worst subject ever. And I've spent the last 6 months reading how journalists use grammar and language to improve our, and how we can use that in BDD. So I'm starting to go slightly geeky on grammar, which is something I've never thought of. And I keep quoting Mark Twain everywhere I go. So the difference between the almost right word and right word is a really large matter. It's the difference between the lightning bug and the lightning. It's just that change in terminology can have a big impact on our meaning. So when we're writing these scenarios out, why don't we, or maybe the product owner, not pick up on these missing issues or any problems with the scenarios? And that comes down to the concept of, well, not concept, but proofreading. We are really bad as humans at proofreading our own work. If you think professional writers, journalists, they use lots of different techniques to try and proofread their own work, and they write for a living. They'll try and change all the text into italics, print it out to different pieces of paper, instead of reading off the screen, leave it for a few days, and come back. It's all to help them with proofreading. But we don't have the option of doing a lot of those, certainly not waiting a couple of days. Now the reason we have a problem as humans comes back to something very similar to the illusion of transparency, cognitive bias. And again, Mark Twain has got a good quote on this. By the way, this is a quote from 1898. I think there should be a competition on who can get the oldest quote related to computing at conferences, but you think you're reading proof, whereas you're merely reading your own mind. Your statement of the thing is full of holes and vacancies, but you don't know it, because you're filling them in with your mind as you go along. Because we've written it, we know where all the holes are. It's the same as our mental states with dealing with other people. We think they're on the same mental state. We know what we should have written. Our brain's automatically filling them in because it's faster than us reading it. So we're actually bad at proofreading. But there's a few styles of writing scenarios that we can actually use to help us with this. So I'm going to talk about passive and active voice. So it's just a style of writing, and there's actually a difference. So if you actually read newspapers in America compared to the UK newspapers, Americans quite often use an active voice, but the British press quite often use a passive voice. Now, definition. So passive voice puts the action before the actor. So the verbs, the subject and the sentence come before the actor, the person we're interested in. Now, the downside of this is it means the actor can often be forgotten when you write a sentence out. We assume the actor. An active voice is where we put the actor before the action. So we explicitly have to write a sentence beginning with an actor. Because we have to explicitly put it there, we can never drop the actor. So, 2 examples. The bread was sliced. The bread was sliced by Jackie. It's worth noting you can still include an actor in the passive, but you have to explicitly put them on at the end of the sentence. The meaning hasn't changed much. Where the active version, Jackie sliced the bread, Jackie's always there. And because we're always interested in people using our system, it's actually quite important to actually capture that information. So, if we go back to another scenario, when the guest checks in, it's written in a passive style. We have no actor. The guest is the subject. It's not the person operating the system. This could be confusing. Does our hotel have an automated check-in service where people can self-check-in like you can for flights? If we actually turn it into an active form, write it in an active form, when the receptionist checks in the guest, we explicitly put our action there, we immediately narrowed our requirements. These changes might seem obvious now, but if you write a scenario out and come back to it 3 months later, you start asking questions about it again if you've written it in a passive voice and missed out the actor. It provides a small, crucial piece of information. as I pointed out earlier, you can always include the actor in a passive. If there's a particular reason for writing a passive style, you can always include the actor. We quite often find it's by the.
Going back to the example you gave a moment ago, so the passive voice, like you said, if the guest checks in automatically without the receptionist, then that would cover that scenario, whereas if you're a receptionist, it wouldn't, right?
Yeah.
So the two are different, but that might be correct in some cases.
So that would be, it could be correct in some cases, but you could probably write it in a slightly different way to be active if you're using a kiosk. If you want to explicitly tell people that you're using a kiosk, then how the kiosk operates could be different to how the receptionist operates.
Yeah, but I mean, if you want to include any kind of check-in.
If you want to include any kind of check-in, yes, but I suspect you're going to end up with some miscommunication at some point. Because the way you're using user stories and continuing incrementally delivering features, you'll probably find you've got, at certain points, you've got different implementations for each of the different roles. So there could still be problems. But just writing in the active style, you make sure you include the information you have to. So, in that example there, I used the when step, passive and active. And I suggest, it's not hard and fast rule, it's a style guideline, but I find it very, very useful to use the active with the when steps. Now, you can use a passive style or a modal style when dealing with the then steps in a scenario. You can use these to inject uncertainty. So they should be given a free drinks voucher for every night of their stay. Should be makes this modal, this sentence. And it actually deliberately injects uncertainty. When we're having a conversation with somebody or reviewing this uncertainty allows us put certain triggers in our head to start asking questions. The uncertainty allows us to ask questions and ask for different situations. So it can be a useful tool.
Just a question. You could change it being a passive voice and still say, then they are given free drinks voucher for every night. So changing the verb, also is a passive voice. It removes some uncertainty. Is that possible?
It is possible. I'm trying to think of an example right now. It certainly change the verbs can put the uncertainty in there. Should be is just a very good one at triggering questions. You have to think about what verbs and the passive style that would actually trigger. Because we wanted to discover requirements, deliberately putting the uncertainty at the end allows us to ask questions. Now, other ways of putting uncertainty, or certainly discovering requirements, is to look at the context, so our givens. Ask the business, can you give me another case? Is there another situation where I get the same result? Same with the whens, you can ask for different actions that give the same result. Or iterate through the different possible whens you can think of, and ask for different end results. So there's other ways of doing it, but should be is actually is quite a nice one as well. You'll probably find you start to ask questions when you're writing these down and go back to the product owner. When you start using should be. Now, another thing we do is, me and Liz Keogh have a bit of a debate about this. She has a slightly different opinion than me on this one, is that I suggest that you, once you've cleared up your uncertainty with a scenario, actually change your then steps to be an active voice, to actually put the detail in there. To make sure you get all the details in there. Now, Liz herself and team will actually keep the should in there, to keep the uncertainty there. And it does depend on how you maintain as a team your scenarios as long-term documentation, whether you want to use either of these techniques, leave the should in there or go to active. So my team internally at Hindsight will actually change them to be active because we are quite meticulous at how we maintain our scenarios as documentation. But if you and we will throw away scenarios when they no longer apply. Now, perhaps want to leave the should in there when there's a lot of uncertainty and you need to still ask questions as new requirements come in. So this is just an example of converting to the active voice that the receptionist gives a free drinks voucher for every night to stay. So we're putting the detail in here. We know the receptionist, we know Roy potentially is giving the drinks voucher. It's not printed by the machine. Roy actually has to do it. So actually, perhaps Roy should be prompted by the system to add the drinks voucher. But we know the receptionist needs to do it. So, what type of sentence is the givens here? Given a guest with a room reservation and the guest holds silver loyalty membership, what style of sentence is that?
Active.
Is it active? Or is it actually factual? It's very statement-like. We're setting up a particular situation rather than while we're not actually acting on the system, we're not actually acting on anything, we're not acting on any subjects, we're actually describing the state of the subjects. So that's actually a factual style. So we actually don't need to use the active or passive in our givens. And if you did use a particular style of active or passive, you end up being passive because you start using past tense. Okay. Any questions on the passive-active style of writing in use of scenarios and programming?
So with just what you've said, now active and passive for you it's like the action rather than grammatical form, because what they were saying is that this is clearly someone holds something is an active grammatical form, but what you're saying is more like regarding to the action, you know?
Yeah. We're interested in the action form, so that's typically the way events.
Okay. Because I understand passive and active as grammatical principles, whereas
It's a style of writing. I don't know if it's a strict. Is it a strict grammatical principle? I'll have to check that. It's a strict one, but it's not. I interpret it as a style of writing.
So you would have three things. You have factual, active, and passive in your work.
I quite often have our factual, are active, and so that's quite an active form there. No. Yeah. So this is an active form. This is actually technically modal. It's neither active or passive. Don't ask me the definition of modal because I just learned from somebody whose degrees in English language yesterday that it's modal. So I'm still understanding that. But it's very similar to passive style. Any other questions? So, in the realm of user stories, we have the concept of personas. We often have this persona mentioned in our user story. We actually want to have an understanding of who our user is. So, we can actually use this to our advantage when we're working with actors. So, if we look at our scenarios for our hotel loyalty system, we've got when the receptionist checks in the guest. But if you go back to the example we got from the product owner, the product owner told us that it's Roy. So we're actually missing Roy. Now if we put Roy in there, Roy's a real person. We can just speak to Roy. We can find out what his favourite web browser is. We can find out what's the different information about Roy. Actually, he doesn't really like using computers. So we've actually got to start thinking on our implementation. He doesn't really use computers that well. We have to actually, as a tester, we can start looking at usability. The developer can start looking at usability. If Roy doesn't like computers, we can actually design our user interface to help Roy. Now, where the personas come in is that if you have more than one person using the system, you can actually go out and interview a group of people. Do you actually use personas here? Do you know who your users are? Do you have a wall with your users on there? What their favourite things they like? How good are they using computers? What devices do they use? Okay. Wasn't prepared to dive into what the actual persona is in detail, but I'd actually really recommend doing that. Who uses your system is really, really important to know. So at Hindsight, we have 4 personas stuck on our wall. It's got just several paragraphs of information. So how good they're using their software. What are their goals for using our software? So we've got some users who know nothing about BDD. We've got a particular persona for them. We actually create a name for those types of people. So that name could be Adam. So every time you start using Adam in a scenario, we know we start, or a user story, we know we're talking about those people who are experienced at BDD. And we'll actually make adjustments to our UI. It'll influence our UI design. We know that person's really bad. So by putting the actor, or changing to persona, because you use a real person's name as a group, a whole group of users, we can actually put a lot of information in our scenarios that wasn't there before. So we know Roy uses Firefox. The prime thing we need to test is that it works with Firefox, because that's what Roy's going to be using. Roy's not very good at computers, so we've got to make it really, really simple. It might actually influence us to use a wizard style user interface compared to other user interface styles. So this is what a user persona from Atlassian looks like. Makes a Jira. So they've given him a name. This is an interview of a whole group of people. You create different personas for different groups. So you find the common elements. So as a product owner, certainly product owners should be going out and doing this, actually interviewing people. So we actually have some description about Jose. What's his goals for using the software and his motivations? It could be a lot of receptionists in our hotel system. Their ambition is to actually become a manager. That actually might influence how we build the software. I can't think off the top of my head why, but could do. Now, sometimes, if saying this was a large hotel chain, it would be difficult to create personas for the receptionist, because a variety of people using the system is too complicated or too complex. You have many potential different personas using the system, people with different varying abilities. So we can actually, you can't always use them. You can't even use the real person. So you can do something called decorating roles. And I think this sort of Mike Cohen, who has written quite a bit on user stories. He's actually famous for his book on user stories. Been involved in Agile for an awful long time. And what it does is taking the role that the user is performing and placing an adjective before them. So this can be handy when you don't have personas, because you can actually create up roles that don't have performance personas. So we have a recent guest, a new member, abandoned booking visitor, Bastille visitor. You can just add additional details to the actor using the system by putting some additional information about them, describing them. Because they're all going to use the system differently. You can actually come up with a whole hierarchy of what your roles are doing. So we have a visitor, and then we can have a booked guest, loyalty club member, known visitor. And they all inherit the same properties and attributes as a visitor. We can start building up understanding and mindset for our roles when you can't do it as a persona. That's right. Silver coffee. So, by the way, I normally do this to meet up, so I'm normally drinking beer throughout this. So I do normally put beer slides in there to remind me to drink. I'm doing okay. How are we doing with time? Wrap up. Okay, so often comes along that we have automation, and it can actually influence how we write our scenarios. So I'm going to get through this fairly quick so people can ask some questions. So, given a guest with a standard room reservation, and the guest is a gold loyalty member, it's quite a common style of writing. We're using given, we're using an and. We're breaking it into two separate steps. We're probably doing this so we can make reuse, the dry principle, don't repeat yourself. Apply that principle to our coding. We split it into two steps so we can have two steps we can reuse in other scenarios. From an implementation point of view, though, it can actually pose some difficulties, splitting into steps. So it can be easy to create our guest in our hotel system. By the way, if anybody not familiar with this, this is the builder pattern. Really, really good for creating test data. There's a talk I did at Steam.com 2013 about that, and Richard Bradshaw speaks about it a lot with test automation. Just look up the basic principles of the builder pattern, it's quite good. But when you actually come in to modify the status of a user, perhaps it's really hard to do that once a user's created in your system. So what a lot of people will be tempted to do is actually rewrite and reorder their steps to handle that situation. The problem is you're actually starting to change your requirements to make automation easier. If changing one word and getting that word different can actually change your requirements and its meaning, every time you refactor in your scenario to make automation easier, you've potentially got the risk of injecting false information into your requirements. So you don't even have to split up the steps for reuse using AND. Actually, having duplicate steps with very similar meaning is actually okay. So I've rewritten it from given a guest with a standard room reservation, a guest as a gold loyalty member. I've rewritten it as given a gold member with a standard room reservation. It's actually simpler to write it that way. From an automation point of view, okay, I have to do some duplication. So I've got a guest with a standard room reservation step. If I'm using a design pattern like builder, okay, I can create a guest quite simply. I'm just going to have another step. I'm going to have a duplicate step. But if I'm using design patterns or abstractions or methods to actually put a lot of common code elsewhere, this duplication isn't bad. The violation that we're violating the dry principle, but we're mitigating it by using good abstractions. We're using design patterns. So we don't actually need to change our scenarios most of the time for automation. Why should we change our requirements to meet the needs of automation? At Hindsight, we don't actually do that much automation. Probably only 40% of our BDD scenarios get automated. And we actually do continuous delivery, so we can release up into production up to 10 times a day. We do actually rely on a lot of exploratory testing to help us with that. But we use a risk-based approach. So that's another talk I did on, is how we can use risk to testing. Were you in that talk, agile testing?
No, I wasn't.
It wasn't that. You were somewhere else, is it? Yeah. Quickly, recently they came out a manifesto for specification by example. It's literally in the last 3 weeks. Debbie Evans and Peter Thomas coined this. Peter, I know, works at Bank of America. And it goes like this. By the way, I really do recommend looking this up. It's on Twitter. Because there's lots of useful information that I haven't covered here that you can get out of it. Specification by example, or BDD, is a process over SBE is a deliverable. We're looking at the technique of having the conversation. Writing a document over writing a test script. It should be readable. You shouldn't refactor it to make it easier to test. Optimize for readability over optimized for execution. So again, don't refactor your scenarios. One business rule per test over fewer tests. Understanding for all over experts only. So that's starting to use a common language. You get that by having 3 Amigos meeting. Trust the clarity over disbelieving the results. That's probably one for the business. Easy to find over hidden in the build. It's all about making these readable and not thinking it's about testing. Don't let your test automation influence your requirements. How I interpret lots of those. That's the really key message I want to get across. So I've covered all my content. I've just got a summary of it, but we can probably go straight to questions.
Yeah. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah.
So if we're not using BDD and we don't have to use even when then, what would you be your second favorite way of capturing information?
You're still having the conversation.
Yes.
You can still document the conversation. So in BDD, you don't have to use given when then. You could use a table of data. If it's more appropriate, use a table of data. The given when then is actually a template for structuring. So in the manifesto, I mentioned about one business rule per test. So the given when then allow you to help you structure that. The givens are all about context. What is our current situation? The whens are our action. We perform a single action or a group of related actions, and thens are assertion of those. It's just a template for getting all the information there. So you can do BDD specification by example, by documenting the conversation in any other format that's applicable. Just happens that there's tools that can operate on that, given when format as well.
So do you think that's the most powerful tool for you, the one you prefer, even when then?
I do use it a lot of the time, but there are situations where it's not applicable. So you might find that some banking applications might rely on a lot of tabular data. I can certainly remember I used FITS when I worked on a trading system about 7 years ago. Because that's the most appropriate tool. A lot of that information would be hard to explain if you went there for that. So it's actually choosing the best tool for the job. You still do BDD or specification, for example, just as long as you're documenting it in an appropriate way.
You said you had a BDD tool for Nigeria.
Yeah.
Is that available?
Yes.
What's it called?
It's called Behave Pro.
Maybe for
It just allows you to write your given when then directly on the user story, manage them as long-term documentation, and then export them to Cucumber and the other tools. We can talk about that later, or I can speak to the appropriate person about getting a demo installed if you want.
So the principles you describe as in Eurotech towards a system that has actual human people using it for a UI. If you're working in a more SOA environment, I can see how you could just substitute the actions for other systems. Is there anything else you would take into account when helping the system out?
No, I normally use straight substitution. I haven't had to deal with too many system-to-system situations. So I did get asked a question when I did a talk at the BDD and Agile Testing Exchange about style of writing. Could it be applied to the Internet of Things? I think it would be just direct substitution, but I haven't had too much experience in that area. But it's a pretty good starting place. Any other questions?
So who generally likes the given when then? Should that always be the product owner, or could it be anyone?
It can be difficult to get the product owner to write them. Product owners generally don't think in given when thens. It's actually not a natural way of thinking. So I'd say one person needs to be delegated to do this. Somebody either needs to be taking notes or recording of the conversation, and it's there in an ideal situation they go away, write those up, and they should be then reviewed by everyone. I think that's the best way of doing it. But it's probably the developer or the tester, or actually I prefer the developer and tester pairing on that one. But that's my preference, but it doesn't. I've got to be a pragmatist and realise it doesn't always happen, or it might not be able to happen because of the company culture and structure, but it would be the ideal situation. Any other questions? Or is everybody just eager to get home?
Awesome. Well, I'm sure Alan will be around for. Thanks, Alan.
Did you have a summary? You said you wouldn't have finished.
Yeah, did you want to do a summary?
Oh yeah, I was going to summarise. I just didn't want to keep people, from going home. I know how important that is. So I was just going to recap with it. So using an active voice for your when steps, so you can always include the actor, is important. And then you can use the modal or passive voice in your then steps to certainly insert uncertainty to help you start asking the right questions and discover new requirements, something that wasn't included. Now it's also worth noting with the active voice, including the actor, you can create personas for your actors or decorate roles for your actors to insert even more information. The persona might be off somewhere else on your wall or in your wiki, but everybody can go and look that person up and actually start understanding it. By the time you build up a group of personas, as soon as you start mentioning Roy, Adam, Jim, everybody knows who you're talking about and what their style is. It becomes a common language. You start understanding the actors a bit more. And beware the influence of automation. So, don't refactor your requirements to make automation easy. All those automation problems can be solved in code if you just think about the right way of solving it. Treat these as the requirements that are your source of truth. If you modify them, you risk changing your source of truth. So that's really a quick recap.
Awesome. Thanks.
Cheers.
Thanks for coming, guys. We'll probably put something up on Confluence, just sort of cover all this if you want to put up the video. I totally agree. Price and test was actually we did used to do that.